29th season in the history of Formula One Grand Prix racing began in Argentina, the same weekend that the FIFA officials were drawing for the World Cup final to happen later that summer in the same country. Well, all this largesse costs, and the organisers at the last minute needed to pay another $850,000 to Bernie Ecclestone of FOCA before the race could go ahead. Wearing his other hat, that of the owner of Brabham, Bernie Ecclestone had pulled off a midwinter coup by signing Niki Lauda. He'd been drafted away from Ferrari to join the Brabham team alongside Ulsterman John Watson. A slightly less radical look at Tyrrell this year, just 4 wheels on their 008. The Lotus of American ace Mario Andretti started from pole position, and in third place, returning to Lotus, was Ronnie Peterson. He had signed as a number 2 to Andretti. The American was happy, and the Swede, well, he would honour his contract throughout the season. Early on, it was all about Andretti. With 4 wins in '77, the American former IndyCar champion looked a real certainty as a front runner in the title race. The Brabhams were going strongly with Lauda and Watson, and after falling out with Derek Gardner, the 6-wheel Tyrrell designer, Ken's outfit with its 4-wheeled 008 was looking a little more conservative, but running just as strongly. Lauda soon moved up into second at the expense of Carlos Reutemann. Reutemann being joined by French-Canadian Gilles Villeneuve at Scuderia Ferrari. While there were other interesting battles, the race was largely about Mario Andretti. He ran away from the opposition and hid 13 seconds ahead of Niki Lauda by the checkered flag. Lauda claimed second place, Watson retired 10 laps from the end, and for the Tyrrell driver Patrick Depailler, the season started with a podium position in third. James Hunt was fourth for McLaren, Patrick Tambay in sixth. The new Jacarapagua circuit in Brazil was the venue for round 2. Tyrrell's Patrick Depailler takes us for a ride. Peterson had been the star of qualifying, planting his Lotus on pole ahead of Hunt's McLaren. But at the word go, it was Carlos Reutemann who jumped into the lead. Lole, disappointed at his home Grand Prix in Argentina, was out for revenge, and he was rarely seen again by anybody else. The 5-kilometre circuit was built on reclaimed swampland just outside of Rio with the assistance of Emerson Fittipaldi in its design. It was bumpy, hot and not universally liked. John Watson in the Brabham Alpha struggling to keep the tyres working in the intense heat. And Ferrari's Gilles Villeneuve starting a career of spectacular off-track excursions. His teammate Carlos Reutemann exploited the grip of his Michelins and led start to finish. It was shaping up to be a classic tyre war year, with Goodyear on the Lotus and Michelin on the Ferrari. Ronnie Peterson, fastest in practice, but after a fender bender with Gilles Villeneuve, he was out of the race. Lole was happy with victory, Fittipaldi happy with second place, but 50 seconds back. Niki Lauda was third, Andretti struggling home in fourth. Frenchman in the Tyrrell squad Didier Pironi scored a point in only his second Grand Prix, but compatriot Patrick Tambay went dirt tracking in his McLaren and was soon to retire. Victory for Reutemann, but that meant that Andretti and Lauda were shaping up as the title favourites. The South African Grand Prix, 7 French drivers in Formula 1 taking a little team photo. And one of them, Patrick Depailler, takes us round Kyalami in his Tyrrell. Lauda's Brabham Alpha claimed pole position, but American hot shoe Mario Andretti planted the Lotus firmly out front on the run down to the first corner. So far the tyre war had Goodyear 1, Michelin 1 as the scoreline, but the American manufacturer stepped up to the plate in the biggest way in South Africa, bringing over 3,000 tyres to the circuit to help their teams, and Renault was back with its turbocharged debutante of 1977, looking a little stronger, a little less fragile. Jean-Pierre Jabouille had started the Renault on the third row of the grid and was looking for an impressive race from it as well. Once more the race was all about Andretti, but the Wolf in second place was giving Lauda a run for his money. There were no less than 5 different changes of the lead. Andretti, the pace setter in the first 20 laps, but his tyres burned up and he was to finish 7th. Scheckter took over, but he only led for 5 laps. Riccardo Patresi's Arrows next to head the field. 36 laps on, his engine blew. Then Patrick Depailler, he's leading, but in the closing stages, the Frenchman will run out of gas. The last lap disappointment lets Ronnie Peterson in the Lotus by to win the Grand Prix. Depailler loses out by 0.04 of a second to the Swede. Long Beach, California for the US Grand Prix West, and again a chance to ride around the streets of California with Patrick Depailler. Ferrari dominated the front row of the grid. A big thumbs up for Michelin. Big disappointment for Goodyear playing on home soil. Down into the first turn, Niki Lauda lunged for the lead. Gilles Villeneuve took advantage of the confusion. The French-Canadian led with authority. Only in his 7th Formula One race, Villeneuve impressed the American audience. Despite Mario Andretti's presence in the race, they cheered on what they saw as the next best thing to a compatriot. Watson and Lauda separated the Ferraris, with Andretti and Alan Jones in the Williams in 5th and 6th, ahead of the second Lotus of Peterson, already sporting the signs of first lap damage. The race was soon to end for Villeneuve. On lap 39, he came alongside Regazzoni and Jean-Pierre Jabouille. Trying to lap them, he found himself in an untenable situation and into the barriers. Reutemann led, but Jones in the nimble Williams snapped at his heels until his hopes of victory evaporated along with the fuel in his fuel lines. Andretti claimed second place, Depailler moving up to 3rd in the Tyrrell, his second podium finish of the season. But with win number 2, Reutemann moved himself strongly into the championship frame, tying for the lead of the series with Andretti. From Long Beach to the streets of Monaco, again Depailler is our chauffeur in the stripped-down Tyrrell. Notice his arms with no cockpit surrounding them. Reutemann on a roll had claimed pole from Watson, Lauda and Andretti, but the quick starter was Depailler off row 3. The Tyrrell was second into the first turn, and Watson led for Brabham. Depailler soon found himself sandwiched between the two Brabhams, and on a track where passing is almost impossible, he must certainly have hoped for a good result. By the halfway mark, it was all over for John Watson. The Ulsterman had retired and Depailler led, but Lauda was still right behind him. It would be pressure all the way to the flag for the Frenchman, his 69th Grand Prix yielding victory on the streets of Monaco and a trip to meet the Rainiers. At 34 years of age, he'd beaten the reigning world champion and took the lead in the title race. Andretti jumped away from pole, but the stall of Carlos Reutemann eliminated the 3 world champions in the grid. Hunt, Lauda and Fittipaldi were all out before the first corner. Well, this was the debut of the brand new John Player Special Mark IV, known to the rest of the world as the Lotus 79, Colin Chapman's first real wing car, and still considered by some to be one of the most beautiful Formula One cars ever made. Well, that may be questionable, but its effectiveness certainly wasn't. Again, the engineering brilliance of Chapman had stolen a march on the rest of the world. And the Belgian Grand Prix not only capitulated wholeheartedly to Mario Andretti and the 79, but also painted the way for the rest of the season. Fighting back from his poor start, Carlos Reutemann carved his way back up through the field to try and keep his championship challenge on track. Only one new Lotus available, that's for the number 1. Number 2 Peterson makes do with the older machine for now. And as Villeneuve runs into puncture problems, the older machine will pick up another spot. Mario Andretti's contract allowed him to miss the race and go to the Indy 500. He chose to debut the new 79 instead, and as he led home a Lotus 1-2, he must have contemplated just how good a choice that really was. Early June and the circuit of Jarama is the venue for the Spanish Grand Prix. And at Lotus in the intervening weeks, the chance to build up a second 79. Ronnie Peterson no longer with the older machine, and the rest of the field would be shaking in its boots. From the opening moments of practice, the black and gold machines were quickest, and Andretti claimed pole a second clear of the field. Behind, Reutemann in third, Hunt in fourth. But it was all about the Lotuses and their incredible turn of speed. Despite the qualifying performance, it's James Hunt's McLaren that takes the lead from the start. He's chosen ultra-soft rubber to start the event. Andretti, Reutemann, then John Watson, Villeneuve in the second Ferrari, Patrese in the Arrows, Lafitte and Scheckter in the Wolf. Peterson, who had blown the start in a new 79, was way back, but would soon work his way up the order. Andretti already out front. Hunt's gamble on soft tyres just didn't work. The Lotus didn't need soft tyres, it had big grip. And And the biggest question mark throughout the race was how long would it take Ronnie Peterson to complete the Lotus 1-2? The answer, nearly half the race. So now we effectively have two championships, one for black cars, one for the rest. Jack Lafitte won the second string championship, third for Ligier, ahead of Scheckter in the new front-radiated Wolf. Watson was fifth in the Brabham Alpha, Hunt back on sensible tyres in sixth position. But it was the second consecutive Lotus 1-2, Andretti moving strongly into the championship lead with his third win from 7 starts. Sweden 78 will be forever remembered as the race that got a car banned. Bernie Ecclestone's Brabham team had introduced the new BT full intricacies of a wing car. But Lotus had, and here Mario Andretti and the rest play to the cameras around Anderstorp. Andretti claimed pole in the 79, but the two fan cars in third spot. But others in the paddock were copying side skirts, seen here on Pironi's damaged Tyrrell. But as ever with Colin Chapman's innovations, his was thoroughly engineered because he thought it up rather than copied it from somewhere else. The idea from the fan car may well have come from an early 70s Chaparral Can-Am machine, but that was banned. The fan car was already racing. Lotus and McLaren had not been slow to complain about the moving aerodynamic device on the Brabham. It would be academic for Andretti, whose engine let him the super-fast Paul Ricard circuit in the south of France for Grand Prix number 9. John Watson claimed pole position, the first man into the 200 km/h average, but it was still Mario Andretti who was in the lead after the first run down the Mistral Straight. And despite the best efforts of the Brabham Alphas, soon Peterson, working back once more from a dismal start, would make it a Lotus 1-2. Andretti knew he had nothing to fear from the Swede, who, as a gentleman, would respect his contract to remain in position 2 unless there was no black car in position 1. The Brabhams, the McLarens, the Wolfs, the Ferraris, the Arrows, everybody else was battling for the third step of the podium once more. Lotus 1-2. The championship looking more and more as if it's heading black and gold.
Okay, so we come to the start-finishing line of this lap. Put it into fourth gear for Paddock. Off camber, left-hander, bit of wide. With the power down in fourth gear. Brake hard into third, up into second, down into second, in for Druitt. Hugging the curb all the way around, the flag, the power. Back in, straight into fourth gear from second, because it's downhill. Applying the power. Going along the bottom behind the pits, down into third gear. Long left-hander, a tightening corner. Car understeers a bit. Flag the power. Accelerating along. The outside of the car braking hard. Fourth gear now, for it used to be Hawthorns. Accelerating along at fourth gear. Drop it into third gear. Into third gear for this corner. Accelerating out. Out into fourth gear, down Deer's Leap. Into third gear again for a tight right-hander corner over the curb slightly. Accelerating hard. Down into second gear. Opposite lock into third gear. Into fourth gear, going towards the bridge, braking hard. Into third gear. Right at the end of the...
Jackie Stewart talking us around the Brands Hatch Grand Prix circuit, and suitably at home in Great Britain, Lotus on the front row of the grid. This time Peterson makes a good start, gets the better of his team leader, but it's still black and gold, first and second as they exit Druids. Peterson playing the ideal number 2, lets Andretti through. Wolf with Scheckter at the helm in third place, ahead of Lauda in the Brabham Alpha. Sometimes, though, everybody catches a break, and on lap 6, Ronnie Peterson is in the pits with a damaged fuel pipe. Scheckter can't believe his luck. Andretti's out as well on lap 28 of 76. His second engine failure in succession. With the black and gold Wolf leading, things can get a little confusing for the fans, but not for Niki Lauda. He knows who's first, and soon it's him. Carlos Reutemann's Ferrari is in fourth place, but soon works its way up to close on the tail of the Brabham Alpha. And in the end, the race will be decided not by a front runner, but by a back marker. Bruno Giacomelli's McLaren wrong puts Lauda, and Reutemann seizes his initiative. A close and exciting finish as the Argentine claims victory from the Austrian. Hockenheim sees another black and gold front row. But by now, Reutemann is back on a roll after his third win of the year, closing in on Andretti, who's retired from the last two. Traditionally, Colin Chapman's Lotuses have always been fast but frail and often brilliantly engineered. The brilliant engineering was all too obvious, but so too was the customary frailty. And by lap 9, Ronnie Peterson's gearbox had given up the ghost. Andretti, though, was still out front, and the German Grand Prix looks likely to be his. Alan Jones going strongly again in the Williams, but he would not finish in the points. It would be Scheckter in the Wolf claiming second behind Andretti, with Lafitte in third place for Ligier. Fittipaldi was fourth, Didier Pironi fifth for Tyrrell, and Mexican Hector Rabac in a privately entered Lotus an old one, would claim 6th. Andretti now led the championship on 54 points, 18 ahead of his closest rival, teammate Peterson. With 5 races left to go, Mario Andretti looked to have one hand on the title. But fate is a cruel mistress. The Austrian circuit of Zeltweg, always a dauntingly quick track from driver's eye level, but from the nose of the car, the Österreich ring is truly awesome. Ronnie Peterson led the inevitable black and gold front row, but the high-speed sweeps of the Österreich ring favoured the huge turbo on Jean-Pierre Jabouille's Renault, and he'd qualified 3rd. The Renault, though, didn't have much in the way of throttle response. He's only 8th out of turn 1. But at least he fared better than Andretti, who collided with Reutemann in the second corner and was out of the race. Well, Peterson had a monumental lead going into the early stages, but by lap 3 there were signs of moisture in the air, and on lap 6 a torrential downpour. The race was red flagged and then restarted on wet tyres. The race would be concluded with an aggregate result. Peterson had finished part 1 ahead of Patrick Depaillet's Tyrrell, who'd come to 2nd from 13th. And this was certainly a day for Rainmeisters. The enormous power and dreadful throttle response of the Renault, still yet to complete its first season of racing, would let it down here. But the grip of the Lotus and the nimble chassis of the Brabham Alpha and the Tyrrells would help them up the order. In conditions like these, driver talent is normally what surfaces. Peterson won by 47 seconds. Patrick Depaillet, always good in the rain, was 2nd, and mercurial Gilles Villeneuve claimed 3rd spot for Ferrari, his first career podium finish. The Renaults, well, dubbed the teapots at Silverstone in '77 because they were always boiling up. They stopped for a brew as well. The championship now looked much closer. Victory for Peterson brought him to within 9 points of team leader Andretti. And the paddock was alive with the news that the Swede had signed for McLaren for 79. Now, what about that iron number 2 contract? Would he honour it? The Dutch Grand Prix circuit of Zandvoort. Let's ride on board with the McLaren of Patrick Tambay. An all-black and gold front row. Behind, Lauda and Reutemann on row 2, Villeneuve and Lafitte on row 3, and 5 McLarens in the field. Hunt Tambay, joined by Bruno Giacomelli, Brett Lunger, and young Brazilian Nelson Piquet in only his 3rd Grand Prix. Well, a collision between Riccardo Patrese and Didier Pironi enlivened the first lap, but it's again a day about the black and gold cars. Lotus disappearing out front. Lauda gives a glimmer of hope for the opposition. He'll close to just 2 seconds behind the race leader. But Peterson, despite the McLaren contract in his pocket, plays the dutiful number 2 and slows to hold up the Austrian in the Brabham Alpha. Black and gold 1st and 2nd, Martini colours 3rd and 4th, as Watson joins Niki Lauda in the Martini Brabham Alpha procession. An important victory indeed for Mario Andretti. It launches him further forward in the championship race, another 3 points ahead of his major rival, his own teammate. And Andretti, of Italian immigrant stock, don't forget, could win the title at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, where he first, as a young kid in poverty, watched Formula 1 cars racing. Lotus claims its 71st Grand Prix victory, tied as the all-time winner now with Ferrari. Mixed emotions for Andretti. The championship he had wanted for so long was his, but his teammate was critically injured. Ronnie Peterson underwent life-saving surgery on Sunday night, but by Monday morning he'd been killed by a blood clot. Formula 1 had lost a great talent. Didier Pironi is our driver around Watkins Glen in upstate New York, the venue for the US Grand Prix East. Mario Andretti claimed pole for the race that no American had ever won. His teammate Jean-Pierre Jarier, given a great chance by Colin Chapman, had qualified in 8th place. Clearly the new wing car was tough to get used to. Andretti set off determined to mark his championship with some style at his home track. But he was under great pressure. Reutemann and Villeneuve in the Ferraris were soon past, and Andretti was losing touch. The Lotus drivers' hopes of glory were fading, and by lap 27, again, his engine would put him out of the race. Alan Jones looking strong once more in the Williams in 3rd place, and Jean-Pierre Jabouille driving up the order in the Renault. And as for the number 55 car of Jean-Pierre Jarier, well, his Lotus had picked up an early puncture. Returning from the pits, he was in 15th position, driving his way quickly up the order. He passed the Renault and was soon on the heels of Alan Jones, looking for 3rd place. But in the end, a fuel line failure would put him out. There was glory, though, for another Frenchman named Jean-Pierre. Jabouille in the Renault claimed 4th place. As Reutemann led the field home, Renault scored its first points and the first for a turbo engine.
Alors Jean-Pierre, c'est à la fois pas de chance, beaucoup de chance.
Jean-Pierre Jabouille saying, at one point I thought I was going to make it onto the podium, but I had a few problems with the brakes and was forced to slow down. But in a sense, I think maybe that helped us. No regrets, it's a tough track on fuel consumption, and 7 laps from home I was worried I'd run out of gas, so I slowed down to score our first points.
La Renault termine un Grand Prix et bien placée.
Brand new circuit for the final race of the year on the Ile Notre Dame in the St. Lawrence Seaway, outside of Montreal in Quebec. It had been the venue for the World Fair of 1967 and was now a race circuit. Pumped up by Watkins Glen, Jean-Pierre Jarier claimed pole for Lotus, his career 3rd. Scheckter alongside him in the Wolf, Andretti just 9th after a dreadful time in wet qualifying. For the man everybody had eyes for, of course, French-Canadian Gilles Villeneuve. And he was the better placed of the Ferraris. But this was to be Jean-Pierre Jarier's finest hour. Drafted in to replace Peterson at Lotus, he was certainly making the most of his late opportunity. Building a big lead, 30 seconds ahead of Villeneuve by the halfway stage. Villeneuve was busy squabbling for 2nd place, with Jody Scheckter again going strongly in the Wolf. But Jarier was in a class of his own, even lapping his own teammate Mario Andretti. Soon though, Villeneuve was in front. Jarier stalled in the pits. By lap 50, his engine had let him down. And Villeneuve was about to take an unbelievable victory, leading at home in the first ever race in Montreal for Formula One cars. Only his 19th Grand Prix, and Villeneuve in the first Grand Prix in Quebec, putting a final finishing touch to his 78th season with an astonishing win. Andretti rounded out the season then as the world champion, ahead of the late Ronnie Peterson. Carlos Reutemann 3 points behind in 3rd spot. Lauda in 4th, the previous year's champion. But the hero of Montreal, Gilles Villeneuve.
Formula One.